I keep hearing the same easy to beat argument that Brock Purdy should not be paid $50 million in average annual value by the 49ers. And while I think there is absolutely a legitimate and rightful debate about whether or not Brock Purdy can take the 49ers to the next level, the debate about what his contract should be is actually pretty easily settled. If you're saying Brock Purdy making $50 million per year will make roster construction more challenging for the 49ers, then that's not controversial at all. That's fine. And if you're saying it's a better option compared to starting over with a draft pick or trying to find a cheaper alternative as a free agent, you've now crossed over into a much more controversial and hard to prove argument. But the one that I hear consistently is that, quote unquote, only the greats deserve $50 million in average annual value. And that just does not reflect the reality of the NFL's quarterback market, where the majority of the quarterbacks making over $50 million or around $50 million in average annual value are good, not great. That figure has been well established as the standard for established starting quarterbacks. There's a lot to dive into in this, but let's start with this. Where's the $50 million number coming from? An article in The Athletic today says Purdy's expected to wind up with a contract that will pay him around $50 million per season. It's somebody says he's going to get 50, and then it's unclear if every person is sourcing that or just getting their own information, or it just kind of perpetuates itself. But we're going to go with 50 because that's the number that's been repeatedly used. And let's just shoot that one down real quick. Okay. This is the average annual value for the highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL. Around $50 million. We can start at $45 million for Kirk Cousins. What really throws a wrench in the whole thing, what makes it messy, is that Patrick Mahomes quote unquote, only makes $45 million in AAV. Now it's a 10-year, $450 million contract. The overall value of the contract is massive. But since this is often an AAV argument, we're having an AAV argument. So of the guys that are around $50 million, Cousins, Mahomes, Watson, Murray, Kyler, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson at $52 million, Justin Herbert at $52.5, Goff at $53, Tua Tagovailoa at $53.1, Burrow at $55, Josh Allen at $55, Jordan Love at $55, Trevor Lawrence at $55, Dak Prescott at $60. Of those guys, only 4 of them are great. So wrong. The standard for getting $50 million in AAV is not being great. In fact, you could argue that Mahomes and Lamar and Burrow and Josh Allen are vastly underpaid relative to the other guys making $50 million a year. If your argument is, I don't want to pay Dak 60, fine. Or I don't want to pay Tua 53, fine. But that just is what they make. I think sometimes what happens with quarterback salary is that the numbers have gone up because the cap has gone up so fast that like our brains are 3 years behind understanding what the contracts actually are. For example, when Jimmy Garoppolo signed his contract with the 49ers in 2018, a 5-year, $137.5 million deal, that AAV was $27.4 million, making it at the time, and very briefly at the time, the highest average annual value for a contract in NFL history. Matthew Stafford previously had the high at $27 million. That was 7 years ago. We're talking about doubling that number in a short amount of time. When Jimmy Garoppolo signed that contract, the largest year or the largest percentage of the Niners cap was the first year of that deal. And the percentage of the Niners cap was $15.6 million. Or sorry, 15.6%. So the percentage of the cap was 15.6%. If Brock were to sign a contract that's $50 million in average annual value, and the salary cap goes up by $24 million next year, which is the number it went up last year. It went up from 2024 to 2025 by $24 million up to 279, which is where it is now. So if we use that number again for next year, let's just say that the cap in 2026 is $303 million. Then guess what? A $50 million contract would be 16% of the 49ers salary cap, almost identical to what Jimmy Garoppolo's largest percentage year was. Okay. So the argument that this is only what great quarterbacks make, and since Brock's not a great quarterback, he shouldn't make that much, is just not, it's not reality. It's not real. Now, I do understand the argument that he's not great. And I understand the argument that, last year he really got tested, and some people, you think, well, maybe he didn't pass that test. Last year was the evidence. I tend to think that the evidence is in that no quarterback, no team can win a championship without a lot of help. And the list of quarterbacks that need a little less help is very short. That's Mahomes. But even Mahomes had the number 1 or number 2 defense in the league 2 years ago when they won the Super Bowl. The Eagles last year didn't have a number 1 or number 2 defense, but they had A.J. Brown and Saquon Barkley and Devontae Smith and one of the best offensive lines in the league, right? The Eagles last year were offensively kind of similar to what the Niners at their peak were, just in terms of having a bunch of really good players. They had a bunch of really good players healthy. Last year, a Niners team built on Brandon Ayuk and Christian McCaffrey and George Kittle and Trent Williams and Deebo Samuel. They didn't have a lot of really good players healthy all at the same time. So if your team's built around those guys and they're hurt and then you don't win games, is that evidence that your quarterback can't win without great players? I would argue most quarterbacks don't win without some level of great support. And I would also argue to say, well, they didn't have Trent, they didn't have Ayuk, they didn't have McCaffrey, they didn't have, it's those 3. Like, that's really significant. It's not like he lost one of those guys. He lost mostly all of those guys. And I hate sometimes this argument because I'm in the position of just like, I don't want to be I'm not. If you've been watching or listening for a while, and a lot of you are new here, but if you've been watching or listening for a while, you know that I'm not just like the blind defender. Brock Purdy is great and everybody must bow and he's so clearly great and all of that. That's not my argument. But my argument is that people go too far with this thing sometimes, and they think that it's easy to find the replacement that does a lot of the stuff that Brock does, and it's not. So let's look back at last year. It's not just that he lost Trent Williams basically week 12 on, and then he lost Ayuk week 8 on, and then McCaffrey wasn't there week 1 to week 8 and week 14 on. It's that all of those things happen together. So when you look at, and for those of you watching on YouTube, I've got kind of the availability of the Niners' key players, including Kittle and Deebo. The games that the Niners had all 4 guys available, they played 7 games with 4 of those 5 guys available. They never played a game with Trent Williams, Brandon Ayuk, Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, all available together. Okay? But they did play 7 games with 4 of those 5 guys available. They went 4-3 in those games. This is games with Brock. So this is not week 18 against the Cardinals, and it's not the Packer game week 12. All right? So Brock had 4 of those guys on offense with him 7 times. They went 4-3. You'd love for that to be 5-2, but they went 4-3. He had 3 of those 5 guys available twice. They went 1-1. And he had 5 times he played with only 2 of those guys, and they went 1-4. Now, the question is that a reflection of him, or is it reasonable to think that a good starting quarterback would not thrive if an offense had half, right? That's 5 guys. You subtract Brock, 5 of the 10. They never had all 5 of the 10. Half of his offense was never fully together. I mean, that's significant. That's significant. And I think the argument that I keep, I know the argument that I keep going back to is just that the evaluation's not over yet. I don't make the case that the evaluation's over. He's a premier top 5 quarterback, and everybody who doesn't see it is dumb. That's never the case I make. The case I make is that the evaluation is not over. And now we've reached the point where the 49ers have to make a decision about whether to pay him and find out what comes next, or, cut bait, let's say, easier said than done, but let's just say, cut bait and sign a cheaper quarterback like Geno Smith or Sam Darnold or Baker Mayfield, or draft a quarterback. And my contention is that the thing that gives the 49ers the better chance at competing for a championship is paying this guy $50 million AAV versus, and I realize again, AAV is it's not the best way to talk about contracts, but it's the way this argument gets constructed, versus trying to find a rookie quarterback or, let's just say signing Geno. I like Darnold. Darnold's kind of an outlier, but that's a separate argument. I'm not an advocate of treating him like a great or demanding that people stop the evaluation or even insisting that it's unfair to question him. But I don't think he was that different that last year. And I think the Niners history tells us they will consistently try to find excellent players on offense. And I don't think as the cap continues to rise that paying Brock Purdy this amount of money will prevent them from having some excellent players on offense. Because when you say, well, he didn't have Trent Williams and he didn't have Brandon Ayuk and he didn't have McCaffrey, and that is evidence that, he can't carry them the way they need him to. Another way of saying that is, well, he had Jalen Moore and he had Ricky Pearsall and he had Isaac Guerendo. Why didn't he do more with that? And when you say it that way, it sounds a little sillier. Like, why didn't he do more with Juwan Jennings as his number one receiver and Ricky Pearsall as his number 3 receiver and Isaac Guerendo as his number 1 back? And Deebo Samuel is kind of a running back and no longer a receiver. Well, it was a lot of man coverage. And against man coverage, he didn't show as much of his strength. He's not as good against man coverage. Okay. But this team is not built to play with Juwan Jennings as your number 1 man beater and Isaac Guerendo and Deebo Samuel as your number 1 and number 2 running backs. In fact, I don't think any team would be built that way. No team would be built with Juwan Jennings as your number 1 man-beating receiver, Ricky Pearsall as your Brandon Ayuk replacement, Isaac Guerendo as your number 1 running back. No, Jalen Moore is the Chiefs' left tackle, but Patrick Mahomes is the quarterback. But no team is built that way. No team would be built that way. So that is the other way of looking at last year. And I don't think it lets him off the hook, but I think it's just another way to view the reality of it. And if you think, well, just you got to go get a cheaper quarterback. I mean, draft a guy. The first round picks, let's just go year by year, the last 10 years. Cam Ward and Jackson Dart this year. I mean, first of all, even if you think Cam Ward's the dude, you're not getting to the first pick. You're just not, they're not bad enough to get to the number 1 pick. And Jackson Dart, I mean, we're throwing darts at this point. Again, Caleb, Jaden Daniels. We saw how hard it was for them to get number 3 to Trey Lance. Drake May, Michael Penix at 8, J.J. McCarthy, Bo Nix. Bryce Young was number 1. C.J. Stroud was number 2. Rather have Brock Purdy than Anthony Richardson. I'd certainly rather have Brock Purdy than Kenny Pickett, who was the 20th pick. We saw what happened in the 2021 draft with Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson and Trey Lance and Justin Fields and Mac Jones, who's on the team now. And you keep going back. The 20 draft. Oh, well, 2 is not good enough. Well, that might be who you pick at 5, guys. That's where he was drafted. Jordan Love at 26, very promising. Okay. Exception to the rule. Kyler, number 1. You want to draft 2019 again? Where Daniel Jones went 6th and Dwayne Haskins went 15th? Or how about 2018? Baker and Darnold, Josh Allen. Wish you drafted him. But look, he is the outlier. Lamar, 32, the outlier. That draft is Baker, Darnold, and Rosen, 3 to Allen and Lamar, 2. Those guys are not normal. Trubisky, Mahomes, Deshaun. Goff went 1. Wentz went 2. Paxton Lynch went 26. Jameis and Mariota went 1 and 2. Like, it's just so hard to upgrade cheaply. So the argument that Brock, he's just a guy. No, he's more than just a guy. He's more than just a guy. A jag, as some people like to call him. Boy, the Niners were awful in the red zone last year. I know a lot of people attribute that to Christian McCaffrey. Well, they need Christian McCaffrey healthy, and any quarterback that had Christian McCaffrey as a key part of his offense would suffer if Christian McCaffrey was gone. So I just think the argument about whether or not you can win a championship with Brock, it's a legitimate argument. But the argument about whether $50 million, and this is the heart of this video, $50 million is like the threshold through which only great quarterbacks can pass. It's just not a fact. It's far from a fact. So let's get to some of your, let's see, do I have any other point I wanted to make there? Okay, let's get to some of your comments. Thanks for being here. This is from Dan CMC. Says, let's not forget that the defense and special teams units were awful last year. That does have an impact on defense. I think you probably mean has an impact on offense. No question about it. The Niners were a top 10 defense for 3 straight years in points. Last year, the Niners defense was bottom 10. So major downgrade. Astro says, yeah, the only problem is having the requirement of winning the Super Bowl. Yeah, I mean, this is, I think I know what you're saying. And there is the curveball around this organization of like, that's where you've been close. That's where you've lost. That's a lot of pain. And so that is the new standard. And, if you say that's not pass fail, then it sounds like you're accepting mediocrity, right? If you're like, well, yeah, Super Bowl or bust, but really just be a good team and compete and have a chance. Like, it sounds like you're going, well, I just accept mediocrity, or, as long as we're making money, what difference does it make? And that's not the case. I do think for the most part, if you're going to be a top, 10 team in the league and you're going to compete for a championship, you got to just be around the ball. And, viewing every year's Super Bowl or bust will just set you up to fail. Now, you guys know where I stand on this. I'm not a Kyle Shanahan can't win a Super Bowl guy. I know a lot of people, I don't know, are that way. I'm not one of those people. So I do think that this team can have enough talent to give themselves a chance, and that Kyle Shanahan is capable of it. Manhattan John says, or kick rocks, kid. You're under contract. You can play for $900,000 instead of getting $45 million. Yeah, I mean, that is one negotiating tactic. I don't think the $5 million in average annual value per year turn out to be a game-changing hindrance to the 49ers. Eventually, you have to make that decision. So even if you argue like, well, this year you don't need to pay him, but next year, at some point you have to decide whether or not you're paying the guy or not. So, I mean, that sounds great, but we're dealing with human beings and negotiations and, positional value that says that, he's worth more than that based on what these other guys make. But Manhattan John throws $10. So let's keep going with the super chat. The argument is if Brock can outplay Mahomes in the Super Bowl. The argument is if Brock can outplay Mahomes in the Super Bowl. We know the answer so far. So take $45 million or play for $900K and bet on yourself. I'm not totally understanding that first sentence. But I don't think the argument is, can you outplay one of the best quarterbacks of all time? The argument is, can they still, even if they pay him this money, build a team around him that can help him beat Patrick Mahomes? Even Patrick Mahomes, was not going to single-handedly beat Brock Purdy without his defense, which was the best defense by some metrics in the league. So I certainly don't think the reverse is what we're asking here. We're not asking, can you beat Josh Allen mano a mano, or can you beat Patrick Mahomes mano a mano? That's kind of my point, is like, if you paid him $70 million a year, then that's what you're saying. Or if you paid him $65 million a year, that's what you're saying. But if you're paying him Jared Goff money, Justin Herbert money, Tua money, that's not what you're saying. That's just the guys that make this money are by a majority good, but not great quarterbacks. Question: can the 49ers get the same results with Mac Jones that they got with Brock Purdy? Another version of this question would be, can the 49ers get the same results with Sam Darnold that they got with Brock Purdy? I think the answer to this question from this person who might be an animator, I think the answer to this question is, I don't think so. We don't know for a fact, but I don't think so. I don't think they can get the same results with Mac Jones that they can get with Brock Purdy. You know, I think it's hard to find separation in quarterbacks who don't have like an athletically superior talent of some sort. But I do think if you talk to quarterback people, like guys who evaluate quarterbacks over 5, 10, 15 years, the really difficult thing to identify in a quarterback is brain kind of processing power. And you got to acknowledge that Purdy, because of his lack of elite arm strength, walks a really fine line when it comes to performance, in that he has to constantly have his brain on point. He has to constantly make plays on anticipation, on touch, and accuracy. He can't throw late. He can't throw off target by too much. And so what it does is it puts him on a really tightrope. And that tightrope requires maybe a little better blocking, or a little bit better of a receiver than Mahomes or Josh Allen has, or Lamar Jackson has. But I still think that is kind of what this offense, which is proven to win, is predicated on. And I think it requires a certain very specific type of guy to get to a high level. I think it can maintain kind of the beauty of the Shanahan offense is you can be just solid with a solid quarterback. But I think what he has shown consistently is a level of toughness, anticipation, smarts that can elevate the Shanahan offense a little bit. I think it'd be hard for Kyle to get that out of Darnold or out of Mac Jones. You know, I know people say like, well, is he really that much better than Jimmy Garoppolo? And my answer is, I think he is enough better than Jimmy Garoppolo that we can say he's not Jimmy Garoppolo. You know, and it's hard because when you don't have an elite arm, you're kind of trying to make plays in the margins. And it might only be a little bit here and a little bit there. I think his athleticism separates him from Garoppolo in a significant way. And so I don't subscribe. I understand the similarities between him and the offense with Jimmy G, but I don't subscribe to this. It is the same as, it's just the same thing over again as Garoppolo. But I think the point to bring up with Garoppolo is that once upon a time, they paid Jimmy the biggest contract, and they still competed with that under that salary cap, with that percentage of the cap going to Jimmy Garoppolo. And if you think Brock is a little better than Jimmy, like I do, then they can win with that. I never understand the argument of saying hold on. I think I might have missed something here from Eric. Let's see. Eric says, the way I see it, it's no different than when Steve Young lost Ricky Waters. Niners would never be the same without Ricky Waters. I never understand the argument. I'm not saying Purdy is Steve Young. I'm just comparing Tampa Bay Steve Young to San Francisco Steve Young. Yeah, I mean, he's not as good without great players around him argument. You have to apply that to every great quarterback who's ever played. What would Brady be without one of the great defensive minds of all time, Belichick? What would Montana be without Rice and Craig and Dwight Clark and Bill Walsh? What would Steve Young be without Rice and Ricky Waters? Great offensive lines, great defenses. It's just not a good enough argument to me, because history says championship teams have great players at a lot of places. Comment from Brian Carter, real name on the internet. Brock is good enough. As a rookie, he went to the NFC Championship game. His second year went to overtime in the Super Bowl, and the rest of the team botched it. Rough year when half the team hurt and bad defense. I do think the Super Bowl loss was partly on everybody. That's the way it goes. I would have loved for Brock to have made a better decision or a protection adjustment or something on a corner blitz at midfield on third down and medium, where if you get the first down, you might end the game. But it didn't happen. But that's on Shanahan too. That's on the offense. It's on everybody. It is such a cliche, but it is also such a team sport. And the question is just like, when you put a good team around him, can he help elevate you where the collective becomes great? And I just don't buy, last year we had a good, you took away great players and he wasn't as good. You replaced Trent Williams with Jalen Moore and Isaac Guerendo replaced Christian McCaffrey. Like, that is not how you'd build a team. You wouldn't build that team where you take away Ayuk and Juwan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall, your top two receivers. You would not intentionally build that team, even with a really expensive quarterback. If you told me with a really expensive quarterback, George Kittle's other running mates are the number one receivers, Juwan Jennings, and the number one running back is Isaac Guerendo, and your best offensive lineman is a rookie Dominic Pooney, because we've replaced Trent Williams with Jalen Moore, I'd say that's not a real team. You didn't put a real team together. So yeah, you took away greats, but you didn't replace them with above average. Oh, you're not gonna be able to pay a great receiver, a great running back anymore. Okay, well, you'd get an above average one. You're not gonna be able to pay a generationally great left tackle. Okay, but you probably wouldn't sign the guy who was 30th in pass blocking to be your left tackle in PFF ranks. Oh, you don't always get Brandon Ayuk. Yeah, but Juwan Jennings wouldn't be your number one receiver, or Ricky Pearsall wouldn't be your number one receiver in that offense. So I think that's what that argument ignores. They did. I mean, there are, some efficiency metrics. That's the wrong thing to put up. There are some efficiency metrics last year that were still like kind of, in a positive way, kind of crazy. They were atrocious in the red zone, and it killed a lot of the other stuff they built from an efficiency standpoint. They were 57% touchdown rate in the end zone, 14th in the red zone, 14th in the league. That's the number I found this morning. I actually thought it was worse than that. In 2023, they were 68% in the red zone. First in the league, touchdowns. I think their yards per play last year were kind of similar to the year before, around 6 something. Don't quote me on that. Karen says, Hertz is never considered elite, but look at the stars around him. Team sports take everybody. Yeah. Yeah, I think Hertz got his ring, though. Like, that's the thing is, Brock, Niners are this close, don't get the ring. Hertz gets the ring. And when you get the ring, it, to me, like, releases a certain amount of pressure that we're not debating this sort of thing all the time. But at $51 million, they still had Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown and Saquon Barkley and a top 4 offensive line and some stars on defense. Pete says, I'd be stunned if Brock gets north of 55. So would I. I don't think, we'll see. I don't think he's resetting the quarterback market. That's the thing. And normally, I shouldn't say normally. Often, the highest paid or the nearly highest paid quarterback is just the next guy that gets paid, but it can be manipulated. It can be manipulated. Part of my point is if you tell me it's 50, I go, oh, I would have loved 45, but damn, it's better than 55. So let's just make sure we're arguing about the right stuff. I don't think the argument is done. It's not done. I know it's not done. There were people, I remember his rookie year and definitely his second year in the league. I remember his second year as a starter, probably like 8 weeks in. There were people debating, I remember hearing somebody make the statement, the argument's over. Let's stop the argument. Debating whether or not Brock Purdy is a franchise quarterback at this point. It's dumb. There's no debate. He's clearly the guy. And I said at the time, because remember, if you're new here, my deal is Goldilocks. I try to be just right in a world of extremes. And this is a great topic. This topic is tailor-made for extremes. But I said at the time, just so I get let's just get me on the record here. I said, no, of course the argument's going to continue. The argument, you don't get to end the argument after 8 games or after 16 career games. No, it doesn't work that way. It takes years to figure out where a player's place is. And before you get to the end, you have to make hard decisions about whether to keep the player or replace the guy. And if at quarterback, your decision is it's easier to do this and it's better for the franchise to do this than replace him, it gets expensive. But I still contend you can win at a high level with him. Daniel says it was a live stream and guy was not having that line. I remember it. I'm glad somebody remembers it. I've said 10 billion words since then. So a lot gets lost in the shuffle. But part of my point was, last year was a great example. We're still arguing about Josh Allen last year. We're still arguing about Lamar Jackson. Still arguing about Justin Herbert for sure. Who aren't we arguing about? You can find people who will even argue Joe Burrow with you. Not a lot of people, but there are people. So who aren't we arguing about at this point? Nobody gets to just announce that the argument's over. The only thing that you can definitively say is, here is what guys make. And there it is. It's all there for us to see. So if you say he's worth 40 a year, that's what Derek Carr makes. I would say he's worth more than that. We're like, well, that's what Matthew Stafford makes too, guy. Fair point. Underpaid. Stafford's underpaid. Mahomes on the AAV, underpaid. Stafford's also older, which hurts things. Oops. Let me see here. He's also fragile. I don't think he's fragile. I don't think he's fragile. He's not a big guy, but he's not fragile. He's not fragile. What did you miss? A game last year? And then the week 18 game? He's basically Derek Carr. We disagree about that. But that's fine. Derek's also on his age. I'm not prepared to make an age argument, but age factors into this. Derek's making 40 on whatever it is, his 4th contract. If he were 25, 26, be a different animal right now in this market. So that's a part of it too. And he's been hurt multiple times. Yes, I am ignoring Deshaun Watson on this list for a variety of reasons. All right. So there's the argument. We can debate whether he should have been better. We can debate how good of a team you need around him. We can debate a lot of things. But the thing we can't debate is just what's on paper. What quarterbacks who aren't great get paid. Thanks for hanging out.